And with that, I will pass it off to you, Erik.
All right, thank you. Ajay Chepot, Tiapthot Atnan. My traditional name is Tiapthot, given to me by my great aunt Elsie Paul, who will be joining me today to talk about food security and food sovereignty. I think any of the housekeeping items were just discussed, but again, if anybody has any questions, please raise your hand using the function under reactions at the bottom, or just type them into the chat and we'll be sure to answer any of your questions through the chat function. My English name is Erik Blaney, and I come from the Tla'amin First Nation, located on the Sunshine Coast, north of Vancouver. And I've been working with Notsamout now for about 6 years in a few different capacities. And I'm joined today by Elder Elsie Paul, who is my great aunt and beloved elder in the Talmud Nation, who has a lot of experience and history of living on the land throughout our territory and utilizing our resources in a good way. And she has lots of teachings to share. So I'll pass it over to Elder Elsie Paul to do a quick introduction, and we'll get on with the discussion we're going to have today. Chicha.
Thank you, Erik. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Loud and
Okay,
clear.
I'm good to go. Okay, good morning, everyone. It's an honor for me to be here today. My traditional name is Cox Dallas. That name was given to me by my grandfather's mother, who came from Cape Mudge Reserve. So I really am proud to carry that name and pass it down. I passed it down to some of my granddaughters and that. And so culture is really very important to me. And whatever I can share, I'll share with you today. Food security is very, very important. And the respect for food. I always say that to my family, you know, don't waste food, use it up. It's this is what I remember growing up with my grandparents, that respecting food, don't be wasteful, because if you're wasteful, then things don't come to you. And that just isn't for food, it's for money, possessions, that we always respect what we have and treat it with care. Don't be wasteful. I think our biggest problem these days is how much food we waste and how much material things we waste. Young people today seem like they can never get enough of more toys and more of this and more of that. And I always say keeping up with the Joneses is our biggest downfall. But going back to respect for the land, the food, the water, respect for the food that the Creator has given us, that we appreciate food from the water, from the land, that we are thankful. We give thanks every time we take something from the land. We give respect every time we take food from the water, such as clams or fish, any kind of fish that we get in our territories. And whatever we need, whatever we use, my teaching was, don't just throw away the bones in the backyard or throw it out there. It doesn't belong to there. part of respecting the fish family, the salmon, whatever, cod we get. Take the bones back to the ocean and say thank you to that family, whatever species that is. It's all respect. It boils down to respect and honor for the things that we take from the water, from the land. When our men go hunting, respect what you get. Be thankful if it's the deer family. You don't just throw out your waste out there and parts you're not going to be able to take home. You bury it, you take care of it, you take care of the hide, you use the hide. I guess it's, it's not, we're a throwaway society, and we've learned that. We've lost our way in a lot of ways. We've lost the so important teachings of our ancestors that they did not waste things. They didn't waste anything. Nothing went to waste. You used everything that you got from the land and from the water. And just waking up every day, be thankful for that day. Be thankful. Don't take things for granted, because we do not know how long we're going to be on Mother Earth. So we really need to look at all of those things and try to bring that teaching forward to our children in a good way. Be thankful. Be thankful for the gifts, because there are people out there that don't have anything. We're so fortunate in our country. It's coming to a point in our time and history where I'm really recognizing the teachings that are lost, in terms of being thankful that you woke up this morning, that you've got food on the table, that you have family around you. Be thankful for your mother, your father, your relatives. Honor them. Be kind. Watch what comes off your mouth. That's all part of the teachings. So it covers a wide range of how we live, how we honor one another, how we honor the land, the water, and people. Watch what comes out of your mouth. Take care of one another. So if anyone has any questions, I'm open to questions. I don't want to be rambling away here. And if there's questions, I'm not sure how much time we have. Is it half hour, Erik?
Yeah, I think I can't remember what we're going for, but I think
it's half hour, right?
half an hour. Okay.
Yeah, whatever. Well, just tell me to stop if I'm talking too much.
Yeah, we're going till 10:30.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, your words are always welcome, Chicha. And taking it from there, looking at the comprehensive community planning session and what we did as a nation here. Most people know that our nation is a treaty nation, and that came into effect in 2016, and we negotiated for about 14 years. So our nation, the Tla'amin Nation, is a modern day treaty nation. And I think going through the negotiations piece, we had a number of treaty related measures, and one of them included comprehensive community planning, and really looking at how we wanted to preserve pieces of land to create that food sovereignty and that food security for the future generations was a big piece. And looking at the impacts that industry had on our territory as it was colonized and developed was a painful exercise for us. We had at one time the second largest sockeye run in the entire world when the Spanish came through in the 1500s. They were actually scared of how many fish there were in our territory when they visited our village site of T-Squat. They thought they'd ran aground when they were coming around Texada and towards our village, but they actually bumped into a big ball of herring. The herring was so abundant back in those days that the Spanish sailors actually thought they ran aground and hit a rock, and they had just run into a big herring ball. And a number of their deckhands ended up going below decks and started to pray. So what had happened through the exercise of negotiating our treaty was looking at our foodscape and looking at what our people ate. And we went through some exercises with Simon Fraser University and the University of Saskatchewan. And through archaeology, we actually reduced the screen sizes in the screens that the archaeologists were using. And that started catching all the herringbone. So we went with the traditional ecological knowledge that our elders shared about how important herring was, and put that into practice with the archaeologists, and looked at our food source, which, you know, about 60% of our food was herring. And we heavily relied on herring, which we can't really get anymore. The commercial herring fishery in 72 all but wiped out the herring for our people. So again, looking at food security and food sovereignty, how do we bring those herring back? And how do we create an environment that allows those herring to come back when you're constantly battling with DFO and trying to prove your case constantly that there were resident herring here and that our people heavily relied on that, and how important it is for us to get back to that traditional diet, because a lot of our people are sick. They're not getting those omega-3 fatty acids that they need from that food source. So when you're looking at comprehensive community planning, I would encourage people to also look at marine planning and marine use planning if you have, if you're a coastal community. I see a few coastal communities on here. But look holistically at your food sources. Agriculture and farming became a huge priority for our nation during the COVID outbreak. So we actually had one of the largest COVID outbreaks per capita in all of Canada, where we saw about 37 of our people get COVID out of 700 people in the community. And we are a barge dependent community. Our food all comes in every Tuesday and every Thursday on a barge from Vancouver, from the Lower Mainland. So if any of those barge terminal workers get sick, if the truck driver got sick, you know, there's a number of roadblocks or pinch points where our food security could be cut off. We realized very quickly that shelves could go empty. And we saw that, as a number of you probably did too, with toilet paper disappearing. Everybody was looking for toilet paper about a year ago. And we realized quickly that toilet paper is not the problem. You know, fresh milk from the Lower Mainland is the problem, and fresh vegetables coming from the Lower Mainland and Mexico and California and beyond were a major problem. So at that point in time, we started to really think about food security and food sovereignty for our nation and what that meant to us. So food sovereignty for me really gets back to our traditional ways and our traditional diet and what our people consumed in this territory, you know, since time immemorial. We consumed herring, we consumed clams, we consumed elk, deer, and salmon was a little piece of our diet. You know, a lot of people think as a coastal nation that our people survived mostly on salmon. Herring was the largest food source for our people. And we found that out through the archaeological record through 6 years of field schools that we did here. And that varied from place to place. There's a village site up in Theodosia, right at the head of Lancelot Inlet, where we found these beautiful colored layers of green and purple urchin. And with the waters and the way that the waters move throughout Oakover Inlet, there's abundant urchin in that inlet. And you can see that through thousands of years in the layers of archaeology through excavation that we did, intertwined with pieces of herringbone during a season of herring. I believe they said the equivalent of 2 tons of herring were found at this one layer. So I imagine a very good herring run 2,500 years ago, in which our people really harvested a lot and probably dried that herring for use throughout the winter season. That village site up there does freeze up. So, you know, to have access to those resources in a sovereign way and own those resources through our rights and title or through negotiations through the treaty process, I think is a piece that nations still participating in the treaty process should really have a strong look at, and make sure that you have food sovereignty pieces identified in your comprehensive community plans, in your negotiation tactics with the province and the federal government for access to those historical traditional diets. And that goes on to future food sovereignty and food security methods of growing food within your territory. We kind of fell victim to some of our lands being stuck in the agricultural land reserve. And if anybody's dealt with the ALR or the ALC, they know that it's a very stringent and tough system, and you can't really pull your lands out of that system. So through the treaty, we inherited this ALC piece of land that we can't really do much with. Farmability, it's all bluff. You know, it may be okay for some pasture or some growing of grapes, but you know, that's good for an economic development perspective. But when it comes down to living through pandemic times, how much grapes are people going to eat and when you can't sell your wine? You know, so for me, looking at food security and food sovereignty, I see food sovereignty as a real traditional access to your historical food sources. And then food security, I think in a CCP context, would be more relatable to what are your people eating now? And how are you going to have those foods if the world gets turned upside down, or if you're in an emergency situation? You know, we've got a number of communities now that went through one of the harshest wildfire seasons ever seen on record, and they've lost thousands of hectares of land that have been burnt up, and they're now dealing with areas of landslides because all of those helicopter buckets full of water have now flooded out certain areas of their territory, and they don't have access now to some of those food sources that they would have had going into the winter time. So looking at building back better and looking at how you can recover, you know, that's another piece that I see in this CCP and people's emergency plans is your recovery plan. And the recovery plan needs to include building your traditional landscapes back better, because our people did burn. We used Middle Natch Island and a number of other islands to collect purple camas and chocolate lily, you know, Indian rice and Indian potato. And that was our starch. Those were the starches that we used in our cooking once a year. And my grandpa talks about rowing his mom out to Middle Natch Island to collect eggs once a year as well. So that's been lost in our territory. And there are discussions with BC Parks and other agencies who own tracts of land where we traditionally harvested to do traditional burning, because we're now seeing more invasive species, different types of trees, and Himalayan blackberry coming to these locations and taking over the habitat that our people needed to grow those camas and those chocolate lily flowers. So there's a whole big piece around food sovereignty and food security, I think, that people really are just starting to think about in some ways, that stemmed from the access to food resources through COVID and through locking down your community, and how do you distribute food. And right now I've heard of a number of different projects. I think we have someone from Awikano on here, don't we? Yes, we do. I just heard about a program up there in, I think it's Rivers Inlet, and there's another territory that are doing it right now, where they're trimming the old crabapple trees. They're finding that in recent times, there's some salmon returns that are struggling right now. And we're seeing a low number of chum returning back this year. So I was just up in Butte Inlet on the weekend hunting elk, and the bears were still out and the bears were still hungry. We had a really low return this year for chum. So those bears are typically fat and happy and waddling up the mountains by now. And they're still in the rivers right now fighting over every little piece of salmon that's coming up that is still fresh enough for them to eat. And they're starting to eat some of the more scabby fish, which tells me that they didn't get enough food through the harvest season of pinks and coho and chum. So hopefully we'll see some more coming back. There's still some fish jumping in the estuary. But how do we feed those animals? You know, it's not just us who need food security. It's those food sources that we also rely on that need food security. So when you're bringing back a species like herring, what is the habitat that needs to be protected? We're looking at eelgrass surveys, we're looking at bull kelp surveys, and we're looking at the habitat needed for our food source to survive as well. So I would just really encourage people to contemplate how they plan to survive 7 generations down the line. And what my nation is doing now is we're looking 210 to 230 years out. And I'd like to see our plans go those 7 generations. So we're looking at, 30-year increments and planning out those 200 to 250 year plans for everything. And I think that should really look at your CCP as well. And it's really tough when you are running a Indigenous government and your funding is, almost set up to fail through ISK, and you're constantly putting out fires day to day. And to start thinking down the road of 100 years or 200 years is challenging to do. But even just as an individual, sit and think about it, and think about each generation and how industry and the way we're living off the land right now and developing our land is impacting our food security and our food safety and our food sovereignty. Looking at protection of resources like old growth habitat, where there's 3 to 6% of old growth habitat left. What food sources are surrounding that old growth forest, and how do we rely on that biodiversity that is provided by old growth forest, because none of it's protected? And are there important medicines and pieces of traditional food that need to be protected, such as mushrooms and different roots that only grow in those old growth forests? One of the big things right now that we're struggling with is, and Chicha alluded to that, was water management. So in BC, everybody thinks we just have so much water and it's abundant here, and it is. My territory here, we have over 30 lakes, we have the ocean, we have clams, we have lots of food. But what did we have 1,000 years ago? How much more did we have? And right now, with the ongoing development in our territory, we're actually seeing a lot of impacts to aquifers. So there's a lot of aquifer management that needs to be put into comprehensive community plans, land use plans that incorporate management of water, not just as a drinking source, but as a piece that sustains life and sustains your food source. So some of the water that you get from a well could be thousands of years old, and that seeped off the surface down into the groundwater and is now sitting in an aquifer. And we're seeing aquifers dry up. We're seeing impacts to aquifers through fracking and other natural resources that either contaminate an aquifer or suck it dry. We're seeing bottling plants put in places that are pumping out millions of bottles of water each year and tapping out aquifers that farmers need to feed, to water their farms. So another big piece for our people is to think about our ownership of water. And it's really hard as an Indigenous person to talk about ownership of resources, because Elsie can confirm that we didn't own anything. We belonged to this web, and we belonged to the web of life, and we're just one strand in that web. And we don't own the water, we don't own the trees, we don't own any of that stuff. But now, as Indigenous communities protecting our food sovereignty and our rights and title, we have to say we own it, which is it's a hard thing to do. But we have to really hold it tight and say that we can manage it better. And the way that we need to do that is strategically through these planning documents and these exercises that a lot of our nations are doing to really take a stand and put their foot down with their rights and title and protection of those resources in the territory. Just to at least pause and give them time to plan and think is kind of where we're at right now. So I feel like I've been talking a lot, and I kind of wanted a little bit of dialogue throughout this presentation to hear from others on the line here. And as you can tell, I think Chicha and I probably got it from her. We could talk forever. But are there any questions coming up in the chat, or is there anything anybody would like to hear from us on or talk about?
Hi, Erik, Chicha. Nothing in the chat so far, but I'd like to encourage folks, if you'd like to turn your cameras on, you can absolutely do so. If you'd like to just write them in the chat, I can read them out for you here. Whatever your preference is with your questions, we can accommodate.
Okay. No questions yet. Perfect. Okay. So moving on then, I put down a couple of topics here, and another big piece that I think needs some more thought and dialogue around is climate change impacts. So I know, Chicha just had a milestone birthday, and, when you were 38, my age, things must have looked a lot different, and your food source was probably a lot different at that time. Do you want to talk about what kind of diet you had growing up, Chicha?
Well, diet was very, very basic. We never had pizza. We never had all this cereal that we have today. And, for what we feed our children, our grandchildren, it was all very, very basic. We ate a lot of seafood and game, such as deer meat, and it's pretty much what we lived on. And you were talking about herring and, dried salmon, and our people just knew where to go, what time of the year. That's why our people moved around so much. That freedom of moving where the food source is at that time when I was growing up. Going up to Theodosia, because the fish comes up there earlier than out here in the waterfront, and just doing barbecued salmon up there and storing it away, drying it and storing, and moving to another river in probably 2 or 3 weeks after where we'd done all our barbecuing, this huge salmon, chum salmon, and then going to another river. That was our people. So we're so good at identifying the different species of, although they were all chum, but they were different grades or different levels of how much oil. The one from Oak Over Inlet River was really oily fish, and that was really the best for toasting over the open fire in the winter. And guasichin, we called it guasichin. And then coming back to the main village here around this time of the year, early November, and that's where the majority of the drying of the chum salmon was done. I remember my grandmother doing about 300 fish every winter from this river. They had huge smokehouses. It wasn't your little chief smoker that our people relied on. It was huge. So, and that was dried. And also our dried fish, our dried smoked fish, dried herring and dried herring roll. There was a lot of trading going on when I was growing up, where we'd go across the water over to Campbell River area to trade with dried herring roll and dried herring, and their goods and our goods. You know, there's a lot of trading going back and forth, sharing. So I felt back then life was so rich by doing that. So we didn't only trade in food, but other goods, maybe, you know, what they had, maybe bedding or whatever, or towels or whatever, you know. And that's pretty much what our people did. It was a lot of trading of goods, dried clams, butter clams. And in the summer when my grandparents went up to Chilliwack area, pick hops, or further down the states, they would take with them dried clams and trade it there as well. So there was a lot of so much work that went into accessing our own food. Dried herring eggs, dried in the springtime around March, early March is when the herring spawn would be here. And that's all gone now because and the whole here from as far as you could see was white from the herring spawn. And we would put our branches out there, cedar boughs, and the herring would spawn on those cedar boughs. And that was also dried. So there was a lot of manpower, a lot of work that went into accessing all the foods that I grew up with. That's what we lived on. So I'll tell my kids, I was 10 years old before I tasted cornflakes. I didn't know what dry cereal was. So, but we lived mainly on, you know, deer meat and clams and fish and cod. And in front of our place here, where I look down every morning or every day when the tide is out during the day, I see the fish traps out there. And my grandfather used to say, oh, I'm going to go down there and dig enough clams for clam soup, clam chowder for supper. You can't even find a clam down there now because it's all contaminated. So we've lost all of that by, I don't know, we live by the mill here, and all that stuff that was spewed out into the ocean from the mill, it just contaminated and did away with, we can't access any clams down here. I've seen it, and even cockles. We used to get cockles in the sandbar down front of my place. There's nothing there now. So the clams are just totally black and hard, and it's not edible anymore. So those are the foods that I grew up with, remember growing up with. We didn't use a lot of seal, but I know the elderly people loved seal. It was once in a while. They didn't preserve it, but they used the oil from the seal that rendered down, and that was what they used for frying, and the oil was used for a lot of other, it had other use as well. But that was the seal oil grease that my grandfather rendered down. So those were the kind of foods that I remember growing up with. And people having gardens, a potato garden, turnips, carrots, and that was pretty much basic food for survival. Yeah, it's pretty sad that we just are losing all of that, and we're so dependent now on that we could rush off to the store and buy canned goods and things like that. I don't remember us having canned goods when I was growing up. My grandparents dried food. They dried berries in the summer, shallal berries, blackberries, white, red caps, and black caps, and plus from the garden, like apples and things like that. That was pretty much food from our lands and waters around us. So that, but we were again, I go back to again saying again, respect the food and where it comes from. Thank the food, thank the Creator for the food that you're accessing for that day. We didn't have freezers full of food, but we had dried food, and mostly dried food. But before you take food from the land or the water, you always thank the Creator. You always be thankful. So I think that's something we're forgetting today, to teach our children appreciation of the food and look after it and respect it, and don't be wasteful, which I see so much of today. And yet we have so many hungry people out there that are homeless and hungry, and restaurants throwing away food because of regulations. They can't just give that food away that they're throwing in the garbage to people that are hungry. So there's been a lot of change in my years, and it's hard to see that, and the young people today just don't see that. So I think we need to really stress that to the young people, to our children, grandchildren, not to be wasteful. Try to go back to living off the land. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chicha. That's really important to look back at seasonality. And again, I think that's a big piece that needs to be looked at, is a climate change adaptation plan. So another piece that, is integral to planning your community out what kind of houses do you want to build? How long are those houses going to last? And what kind of lot sizes are you looking at? Do your communities rely on septic and well? That's going to determine what kind of gardens you can put in and what kind of food you can grow. So planning your communities like our nation's planned for thousands of years around your food sources is really important. And we're so disconnected with that today because we're shoved onto these tiny reserves, and we've been given the shabbiest land that was available back in those days. You know, every nation that I know of is either beside a mill or has a train track running right through the middle of it. The soil's not very good, and it's not very farmable. So what do we do? You know, how do we create that food security when the lands that we were given through the Indian Act are unsuitable for growing food? So how do we plan how we're going to live off that land for the next 7 generations? And there's a lot of different methods. There's some new methods to farming and agriculture that are small footprint, but high producing. There's a number of different companies out there that are growing vegetables in shipping containers, or they have large greenhouses and everything's hanging and they're not using any soil. They're using aquaponics. I've seen green pepper hothouses that are heated by geothermal. So looking at the amount of rain accumulation that you get in your territory, the amount of sun that you get each year, and looking that 250 years out for your 7 generations, what are your best predictors that you're going to have that amount of sun or that amount of rain in that many generations down the line? And how can you today live in a different way that's going to create less of a footprint to allow the regeneration of your territory to provide you with those food resources that your elders saw? A lot of people say it's too late, and you know, we got to get out of that mind frame. That I was talking to someone the other day about the mill in our town, and they said that the mill was going down 50 years ago. And I remember when my grandpa worked there 25 years ago, it was going down. And you know, people just keep saying it's coming, it's coming. And even my parents were talking about this the other day, that the world is supposed to end in 2012, and it was supposed to end in the year 2000, and the Mayan calendar says 2021. So we're pretty superstitious about things like that. But I think, you know, living day by day is how our ancestors did it. And they did it around food, and they did it around helping each other out and trading. You know, trading is huge. And I think that's a piece that a lot of our nations, not just in BC, but across Canada, could start working on. And I talked about this in the Food Network, is if we're abundant with elk here, let's trade with a nation up the coast that has no elk for some halibut. I think there needs to be more discussions with nations about food barter and food trade. And I'm really interested in that. I really think that's a way to create healthier communities and to help each other out. There's also a program on APTN right now that's called Red Chef Revival. And I would really suggest that everybody watch that. They have different episodes each month that are put on there. And the chef that was on there the other day, he was making oysters, and he was harvesting medicines from the land, and he was cooking over an open fire on the beach. And to see the types of food that he's making in a contemporary way that satisfies our tongues these days, our taste buds have changed. You know, and that's how McDonald's got us. You go with a really salty burger and a really sweet soft drink, and it satisfies your system. It creates that dopamine and says, oh, that tastes really good, I want some more. It creates an addiction. And I think what our people need to realize is that, you know, no offense to our traditional cooking methods, but is there a better way that we can make our smoked salmon or our elk or our traditional foods that's more palatable for our youth, to get them hooked on that taste. It's not cheap. My daughter is 12. We go to a restaurant, she wants crab or mussels. We had abalone in Hawaii. It's an expensive diet, but I just love that she's all about it. If there's mussels on the menu, she's eating mussels. And you know, that's a piece of her DNA, that it's built into her, that, you know, she loves that taste and that food. But we need to go out and harvest it ourselves. And I think that's the disconnect that we're seeing right now, is gut health is so important, and people are missing the opportunity to actually harvest their own food where their fingers are dirty. They're getting all of those enzymes and that good bacteria from the dirt and from connecting with the ground and the moss, and just walking through the forest to collect your deer, your elk, you're getting brushed by cedar. And there's enzymes and bacteria that come from those things that really help your gut out and your stomach health out. So just going to the store to buy bleached carrots, you know, those little baby carrots, there's not much good bacteria on those things. You know, sure, they're filling you up and it feels healthy, but you don't get that good bacteria that comes from the dirt. So I think the connection to not just being able to purchase that food and deliver it out to your community, but we need to link that actual harvesting activity in your communities and in your territory with the overall health of your people. And that's something that I'd really like to see more of, is our people getting their hands dirty and actually seeing what goes into their harvesting methods. Harvesting my first elk this year was a challenge. Holy cow. Going all the way up to Butte Inlet and hiking the bush every day in the dark until the first light came out at 6 a.m. and being stalked by a grizzly bear, and finally catching the elk was the easy thing. Cutting that elk up and quartering it and packing it out of the bush and taking care of that elk and hanging it for 5 to 10 days. It's a lot of work, and it really makes you appreciate that piece of red meat that you can now have in your stew or your chili or your Indian chow mein. But you know, it's a contemporary way of putting those traditional foods into your diet is something that we need to look at. So I just encourage people that you know, we need to take a pause and think about our traditional foods, how we can bring those back, how we can plan sustainable communities around our food resources and access to water, and really have that as a big piece in your planning. Always have a look at sustainability methods, access to food. What are you going to do in case of an emergency, and how do you plan accordingly, and create your whole number of plans around this overall community wellness plan, I think is something that we need to look at, because without wellness and healthy foods and those access to water and resources as such, you know, planning a community kind of is a secondary piece, and housing is a secondary piece. And it's hard to think about that because, you know, housing is an issue. We have 12 people in a 2-bedroom house through COVID, and Dr. Henry says they all need to have their own bathroom and their own room. We can't do that as Indigenous people. So I think the way to combat, you know, a lot of the mental wellness and social issues that we're seeing is through reconnection to our lands and collection of our own food. And it feels good, you know, it really feels good. I'm getting a heads up for 5 minutes remaining. Is there any questions out there? I see Carol August says that's a great idea. That was about the food trading. network. And I think there is a Facebook group that I saw at one point about food trading. I know we've looked at, I think there was Haida who did a trade with another nation about halibut and elk. Our people down here used to hike the grease trail, so we would trade grease or herring oil or dried herring with the nations up in the Chilcotin. We would trade for berries. So, you know, our people have been trading for thousands of years, and that's another piece that I think we need to really bring back and share. Chicha, do you have any closing words? We've got about 3-4 minutes left.
I have a question.
Oh,
I have a question about bears and bear meat. And does anybody eat bear? I know I've never, but
oh, really?
I've never eaten bear meat, but because bears are so plentiful right now, and we're all complaining about these bears just all over the place here, and they're getting so tame, and they're living in our communities all summer long. And I'm really conflicted because I really respect the bear, but at the same time, I don't like them. Go away, bear, are you edible?
That's a good question. And I've had bear a couple of times. When I was young, I think it was Gordon and Gibb shot a bear up in Theodosia. And I remember being a little kid, and they rubbed my hands on the front paws and my feet on the back paws.
Mm-hmm.
And my Granny Mabel made stew. So she actually pressure canned stew in a jar, and
Mm-hmm.
we ate it a year later, and it was really good. The meat was really tasty.
Mm-hmm.
And I know she did fry up liver. I don't know about the heart, but I didn't have any of that. And then more recently, Rick Terrell up in Desolation Sound caught a bear, and it was in his apple orchard. And he mixed it with elk, pig fat, and deer, and he ground it all up. And he made a meatloaf out of it and smoked it. So we actually smoked it with alderwood, and we had meatloaf sandwiches that had bear meat in it, and oh, those were so good. But I think the problem now is the bears have been in all sorts of garbage. So the bear meat probably isn't that great in the village, and you got to be really careful with consuming bear meat because of worms and other things that they may carry. So I'd be careful about any village meat, village bears. I'd catch a bear maybe out in the back 40 and consume that one.
Thank you. But other than that, I don't really have any other questions, but I just want to say how much I appreciate this past hour that we've had this opportunity to have this discussion and share ideas, and hopefully, things start to change, that more people look at our food source and with more respect, and because it's not going to be there forever. So thank you all for listening to me this morning, and thank you, Erik, for your presentation. I have a lot of respect for all the work that you do.
I'm hungry now. I want some clams. I'll be right down. Go pick some clams out of that fish trap.
Oh yeah, right. Little black clams.
Okay, thank you, everybody.